The emergency room at Hargrove Medical had a rhythm. Midnight to 3 a.m. Quiet. Predictable. The kind of quiet where nurses counted ceiling tiles and orderlies leaned on walls and pretended not to sleep. Selim Deshan Okafor knew that rhythm like a second heartbeat, which is exactly why he felt it when the rhythm broke. 2:17 a.m. Not a sound. Not a crash cart alarm or a radio burst from the ambulance bay. Nothing. Just 3 men in black suits walking through the east corridor doors. And one of them bleeding through his shirt like someone had tried to empty him out. Selim set down his chart. The man in the middle was massive. 6'3", maybe more. Dark hair plastered to his forehead. A jaw cut sharp enough to leave a mark. His shirt, expensive, the kind that costs more than a nurse's monthly check, was soaked through on the left side. Deep red. Still spreading. The 2 men flanking him were identical. Same face. Same height. Same cold expression that said, "Ask one wrong question and find out what happens next." Selim moved forward anyway. "I need his intake form, insurance card, and I need to know what happened right now." The enforcer on the left looked at him. Didn't blink. "He doesn't need forms. He needs stitches and possibly a transfusion. So yes, he does." The other enforcer stepped slightly forward. Not aggressive, just present. Like a wall deciding to remind you it existed. "Room. Now." Selim looked past both of them at the bleeding man. The bleeding man was looking directly at him. Not at the floor. Not drifting in and out the way blood loss patients usually did. At him. Steady. Focused. Like he was trying to solve something. Selim felt a pull in his chest he couldn't name. He pointed toward Bay 4 without another word and moved fast. The system flagged immediately when he reached the intake terminal. No pre-registration. No ambulance dispatch code. No name. He typed the arrival time manually, 2:17 a.m., and the system accepted it, then paused. A spinning wheel. Then the field cleared itself. He typed it again. Cleared again. Like the hospital didn't want to remember this man had arrived at all. Selim grabbed his gloves and went to work. The wound was on the left side, just below the ribcage. Clean entry point. No ragged tearing the way a street fight left. No blunt trauma bruising around it. Just a precise, deep laceration that had been left open long enough to be dangerous. He pressed gauze to it. The man hissed the first sound he'd made. "Stay with me," Selim said. The man's eyes found him again. That pull stronger this time. One of the enforcers was on a phone in the corner, voice too low to catch. The other stood at the door, arms crossed, watching the hallway. Selim worked fast. Clean the wound. Assess depth. Prep suture kit. His hands moved without thought. Muscle memory. And somewhere in the middle of threading the needle, a feeling moved through him. He had done this before. Not in the clinical sense. Every nurse had stitched wounds. This feeling was different. Specific. Like the act of reaching toward this particular man was something his hands already knew how to do. He pushed it down. Focused. The security monitor on the wall above the door, the one that fed live footage from the east corridor, caught his eye for half a second. He looked up. The hallway footage from 3 seconds before their entry showed nothing. An empty hall. No one approaching. No motion. And then they were simply there. Like the camera had skipped. Like time itself had decided not to record their arrival. Before Selim could think about that, the man's hand shot out. Fast. Stronger than a man losing blood had any right to be. He grabbed Selim's wrist. Not rough. Not violent. Desperate. The grip of someone holding the only real thing in a room full of shadows. Selim froze. The man's mouth moved. Words coming slow. Broken. The way words came when consciousness was losing the fight. But they came. Clear enough. "You were supposed to be gone." His eyes closed. His grip loosened. And the room went so quiet that Selim could hear his own pulse. loud, off-rhythm, wrong. Like it was answering something it had no business responding to. Hi viewers. Have you ever looked at a complete stranger and felt like you already knew them? Drop your answer in the comments. I read every single one. The two enforcers hadn't moved, hadn't reacted, like what just happened was expected, like they'd been waiting for it. That was the part Selim couldn't shake as he went back to the suture. Not the wound, not the missing entry record, not even the dead camera footage. The part he couldn't shake was that the man had said gone, not here, not alive. Gone. Like Selim was the one who was supposed to have disappeared. And somewhere, in a part of his mind he didn't have a name for something agreed. The wound didn't make sense. Selim had stitched bar fights, car accidents, domestic calls that came in wrapped in silence and shame. He knew what violence looked like when it was random, jagged, angry, uneven. This wasn't that. The laceration was 4.2 centimeters. He measured it twice because the first number felt wrong. Too clean. Too controlled. The entry angle suggested the blade had come in at exactly 31 degrees. Not the kind of angle you got from a struggle, from someone swinging in the dark, from panic. That was a planned angle. Someone had cut this man open like they knew exactly where to put it. Deep enough to bleed. Shallow enough not to kill. Selim's jaw tightened. He began stitching. The man, still nameless, still a ghost in the hospital system, was unconscious now but breathing steadily. Stronger than the blood loss suggested he should be. His vitals were holding in a range that didn't fully match the wound severity. That was the second thing that didn't add up. The enforcer near the door had shifted his weight. Subtle. The kind of movement that meant his attention had sharpened, not relaxed. Selim kept his eyes on the wound. He worked the suture in smooth, even strokes. Thread through skin. Pull. Not. Repeat. There was a meditative quality to stitching that he had always leaned into. The focus required pushed everything else out. Except tonight, nothing was going out. The man's breathing had changed slightly when Selim's gloved fingers pressed close to the deepest part of the wound. Not from pain. The shift was too small for that. A fractional slowdown, like a body recognizing something and choosing to be still. Like the act of being touched by these specific hands meant something to the part of him that was still aware. Selim pressed that thought flat and kept working. He reached for the secondary gauze pack and stopped. At the base of the wound. Just at the edge where the laceration's deepest point sat. There was something else. Not a second cut. Not additional damage. A ridge. Under the skin. He pressed carefully with 2 fingers. Solid. Small. Rectangular. He looked up fast at both enforcers. Neither one moved. Neither one spoke. But the one near the door, the one who had not said a single word since arrival. His eyes dropped to Selim's hand. Just for a second. Then back up. Selim reached for the portable scanner and ran it low across the wound site. The screen returned a single result. Foreign object detected. Non-biological material. Microdensity classification. Tracking adjacent. Not a bullet fragment. Not surgical hardware from a past procedure. Something that had been placed there. Recently. Someone had cut this man open, tucked a tracking device into the wound tissue, and then left the wound open just enough to ensure he'd end up in a hospital. Not to kill him. To locate him. Selim set the scanner down slowly. The enforcer on the phone finished his call. He looked at Selim and said nothing. Selim looked back. There were 100 questions sitting in his throat, and he swallowed every single one of them because this was not the room for questions. These were not the men who would answer them honestly. And the man on the table, whoever he was the only one who might, and he was unconscious. He went back to the suture. The second enforcer, the silent one, took exactly 2 steps closer to Selim's side of the bay. Not threatening, just closer. Like he was making sure Selim couldn't reach for anything else. Selim tied off the final knot. He stripped his gloves and reached for a fresh pair. And as he snapped the second glove over his wrist, his eyes caught something he had missed in the initial assessment. Below the fresh wound, below the tracker, further south along the ribcage where the shirt had torn away from the skin. Faint, old. The kind of marking that had been there long enough for the skin to settle around it like it belonged. A symbol, carved, not tattooed, into the skin. 4 lines, one curved, arranged in a pattern that meant nothing to him immediately. But his hands had stopped moving, on their own, without his permission, because somewhere, not in his mind, deeper than that, the symbol was not unfamiliar. He pulled the torn shirt edge back down, reached for the hospital tablet to log the tracker finding. Standard procedure, foreign object, required documentation, and pulled up the archive system to cross-reference wound markers. He typed in the symbol's rough description. The system searched. 3 seconds. 5. Then a match. A single file. Old. Flagged with a medical archive stamp from 6 years prior. He clicked it. The file opened, then immediately collapsed. Not an error message. Not an access denied notification. It just closed itself. And in the half-second before it did, in the space between the file being open and the file being gone, Selim saw 3 words at the top of the page. Deleted, archived, sealed, and below that a case name. 2 words only. He didn't have time to read them fully before the screen went blank. But the first word had been clear enough. Started with his name. The system shouldn't have flagged him. Selim had level 3 clearance. That covered patient files, medication logs, surgical histories. Everything a charge nurse needed on a night shift at a trauma-level facility. What it did not cover, what no clearance level at Hargrove Medical was supposed to cover, was a self-locking archive file tied to a sealed case. He tried the search again. Different keywords, broader terms. The system accepted the query, ran the search, and returned 0 results. Like the file from 30 seconds ago had never existed. He pulled up the patient intake screen. Still no name. Still no record of arrival. The 2:17 a.m. timestamp he'd entered manually was there, but the field next to it, where patient identity should have populated, was blank. Not unfilled. Blank in a way that looked intentional, like the space had been cleared after he'd entered it. He checked the network log from the terminal. 3 external access points had pinged the system in the last 11 minutes. From outside the hospital, Selim stared at that number. 3. The same number of men who had walked through the east corridor doors. He closed the log and went back to the bay. The man on the table had shifted slightly. Not awake, but moving the way people moved when something in their body was fighting to surface. The suture line was holding. Vitals still steady. Unnatural steady, the kind that made a medical professional suspicious rather than relieved. Selim checked the 4 line, stood at the bedside, and without deciding to, he said quietly, "Who are you?" Not to the enforcers, to the man. The man's eyelids moved. Selim went still. The movement was small, the kind that happened in light sleep, in the space between unconscious and surfacing. Not a response. Couldn't be. Then the man spoke. Not loudly, barely above a breath. Selim. 1 word. Selim's full name. Pronounced correctly, the soft C, the held second syllable, the way most people got wrong on the first try. Selim had not introduced himself. He had not said his name aloud since the shift began. His badge was clipped to his chest, but it faced slightly inward from when he'd been leaning over the suture. Not easily readable. Definitely not readable from a prone position with closed eyes. The enforcer near the door turned his head toward the table. Looked at the man. Looked at Selim. Said nothing. Selim took 1 slow breath. He walked to the tablet mounted beside the bed and pulled up the restricted ID search. A function that allowed cross-referencing unidentified patients against law enforcement databases, insurance records, government health registries. He entered the partial physical description. Height, approximate weight, visible markers, the carved symbol, the microtracker, blood type from the draw he'd done during the 4 setup. The system searched. A file appeared. He reached for it, and the bay went into lockdown. Not a full hospital alert. No alarms. No PA announcement. A digital lockdown. Screens froze. The tablet in his hand went gray. The monitor above the bed cycled down to a single flat line that meant nothing. Not flatline, just blank. A small notification appeared at the bottom of the gray screen for exactly 4 seconds before it vanished. Unauthorized memory link detected. Initiating isolation protocol. User, Okafor, Selim D. He read it twice. Unauthorized memory link. Not unauthorized access. Not unauthorized search. Memory link. Like the system thought he wasn't searching for a stranger. Like it thought he already knew who was on that table. One of the enforcers had moved to stand directly behind him. Close enough that Selim could feel the shift in air. Step back from the terminal, the man said. Low. Controlled. Selim didn't step back. He was looking at the gray screen, at the last partial image that had been on it before the lockdown hit. A file. His own name across the top of it. Not the patient's file. His. And inside that file, in the section that should have held his professional credentials, his nursing certifications, his employment history, there was a label he had never seen. Never been told about. Never known existed. Case 0, erased subject. The enforcer put one hand on Selim's shoulder. Step back. Selim stepped back. But his mind was already somewhere else entirely, running through every year he could account for. Every job he'd held. Every city he'd lived in. Every memory he owned. And landing hard on a gap. A 3-year gap. That he had always explained away as a rough period. A season of life he didn't talk about. A chapter he'd closed and moved past. He had never questioned it. Not once. Until right now. Standing in a lockdown bay next to an unconscious man who knew his name. The question arrived like a door swinging open in a room he didn't know existed. What if he hadn't closed that chapter? What if someone else had? The power didn't go out all at once. It flickered first. One stutter, the overhead fluorescence dipping for half a second, and then the wing went dark. Not the whole hospital. Not even the whole floor. Just the east wing. Bay 4 and the corridor surrounding it. Emergency lighting kicked in immediately. Red-tinted backup strips along the floor. Enough light to move, not enough to see expressions clearly. Selim's first instinct was the 4 line. He checked it by touch. Still flowing, still seated. The man's chest was still rising and falling in the same steady rhythm. His second instinct was to locate the enforcers. Both of them had moved. Not toward the door. Toward the table. They were flanking it. Standing on either side with their backs to the patient and their eyes on the corridor entrance. Not protecting him from medical complication. Protecting him from something coming through that door. What's happening? Selim said. Power management issue, the speaking enforcer said. That was a lie so thin you could read through it. Selim checked the wall monitor, dark. He checked the tablet, dark. He looked at the small analog clock bolted above the sink. 2:34 a.m. Then looked again. 2:34 a.m. He watched the second hand. It moved forward and then walked back. Forward, back. Same 17 seconds. Cycling. He blinked hard. Looked again. The second hand was moving normally now. Forward. Straight ahead. But the minute hand was wrong. It read 2:17. The exact time they had arrived. Selim's pulse jumped. He had not imagined the camera gap. He had not imagined the system clearing his entries. And he was not imagining this. A clock reverting to a time that had already passed, looping back like something in this room was refusing to let that moment go. A sound from the table. Low. Not pain. More like recognition. He turned. The man's hand had come off the table edge. Reaching. Not grasping, not flailing. Just extending outward in the dark with a kind of intention that sleeping men didn't have. Selim moved closer without thinking. He reached out. His hand met the man's mid-reach. The grip that locked around his fingers was not the desperate clutch from before. It was steadier than that. Purposeful. The hold of someone who had found what they were looking for in the dark and was not going to lose it again. A sound came from the corridor outside the bay. Both enforcers went rigid. And in that held silence, with the emergency lighting making everything red-edged and wrong and the clock behind him doing things clocks should not do, the enforcer closest to the corridor entrance said something under his breath. He was talking to the other one. Selim caught for words. He remembers more than, then cut himself off. Selim didn't ask him to finish. He was too focused on the other thing. The thing that had started 3 seconds ago and was still happening. A sound. Not from the monitors, they were dark. Not from the corridor. Not from the enforcers or the ventilation system. A heartbeat. He could hear his own elevated off-tempo aware. This was a third one. Separate rhythm. Slower. Underneath his own the way bass sits under a melody. Not loud enough to be coming from across the room. Close enough to be coming from inside his chest. He pressed his free hand flat against his sternum. His own heart. His own pulse. Nothing extra. But the sound was still there. He looked at the man on the table, at the hand still gripping his, at the face that was too calm for someone who had been cut open an hour ago. The sound faded. The lights came back. Full fluorescent brightness. Monitors rebooting. The tablet screen restarting with that cheerful Hargrove Medical loading bar that always took too long. Everything returned to normal in about 6 seconds. And in those 6 seconds, in the window between darkness and light, the man on the table opened his eyes. Not slowly. Not the groggy, confused, where am I crawl of someone surfacing from blood loss and sedation. He opened them like a man who had been awake for a while and had simply been choosing not to show it. Dark eyes. Direct. Fixed immediately on Selim's face. His voice came out steady. No confusion. No rasp. Just words, placed with the deliberate weight of someone who had been waiting to say them. Stop pretending you don't know me. The words sat in the room like something physical. Selim didn't answer. Not because he didn't have words. He had too many, stacked up and tangled and none of them useful because the right answer was I don't know you and that answer felt wrong in a way he couldn't locate or explain or make go away. The man was fully awake now, both eyes open, tracking Selim with a focus that had nothing sedated about it. One of the enforcers stepped forward. The man held up one hand, not looking at him, and the enforcer stopped. Just like that. Complete stop. Like the hand signal had overridden every instinct in the man's body. That told Selim something. This wasn't a victim who had been escorted in by hired protection. This was the one in charge. Even bleeding. Even flat on a hospital table with a suture line on his ribs and a tracking device pulled out of his wound tissue an hour ago. He was still the one in charge. My name is Selim Okafor, Selim said, keeping his voice level. I'm the charge nurse who stitched your wound. You've been unconscious. You lost significant blood. I know what happened to me. Then tell me who did it, so I can file the incident report. The man almost smiled. Not quite. The corner of his mouth moved and stopped. Zenari, he said. Selim frowned. Is that your name? That's my name. No last name. No additional context. Just the single word delivered like it was enough. A sound reached them from the corridor. Not footsteps, something heavier. Boots on tile, moving fast, more than 2 people. The enforcer at the door turned and pressed himself to the wall beside the frame. Hand moving to his jacket. Not drawing anything, just making sure whatever was there was accessible. The second enforcer was already speaking into an earpiece, voice dropped so low it was barely breath. Zenari sat up. Not slowly. Not carefully. He sat straight up from a supine position with a suture line on his ribs and swung both legs off the table and stood. And Selim moved forward automatically with one hand out because no patient did that. No person who had just had a laceration stitched shut stood up like that without tearing something. You'll open the wound. It'll hold. Zenari looked at him. Your stitching is clean. How would you know that? You were unconscious. Selim kept that thought behind his teeth. The boots in the corridor were getting closer. A voice clipped single-syllable commands, and then the sound of something electronic, a scanner, a signal jammer, something tech that had no business in a hospital hallway at 2 a.m. The speaking enforcer turned from the door. They're inside the perimeter. How many? Zenari said. For confirmed. Possibly 6. Internal. A pause. Yes. That single word, yes, shifted the entire weight of the room. Not external attackers. Not a rival group who had tracked the entry. Someone inside. Someone who knew this facility, who had access to the building's layout, who had been here long enough to know which wing to target and which hour to move. Zenari turned to look at Selim fully. Selim looked back. You need to step away from this room, Zenari said. Quiet. Serious. Not a threat, the opposite of a threat. Something closer to warning. This is my bay. And those men in the hallway are not here for medical assistance. What are they here for? A beat. Zenari didn't answer. The second enforcer, the silent one, spoke for the first time since arrival. Voice low and tight, directed at Zenari. He's on the footage. Zenari's eyes moved from Selim's face to the enforcer. Which footage? The mission file. The one from the compound. The one that was supposed to be wiped. A pause. He's in it. Standing in the frame. In operative gear. The room went very quiet. Selim's ears were ringing. Operative gear. He was a nurse. He had been a nurse for 6 years. Before that he had done his program, his clinicals, his boards. He had a paper trail. A record. A life that accounted for itself. That's not possible, Selim said. The enforcer looked at him. Said nothing. The boots in the corridor stopped just outside the bay door. Zenari moved. Fast. Positioning himself between Selim and the entrance with a kind of automatic muscle-level certainty that said this was not a new habit. This was a practiced one. The speaking enforcer said, Sir, confirmation just came in from Central. Zenari didn't turn. What's the confirmation? The retrieval order. It wasn't for you. A beat. A pause that stretched 2 seconds too long. We weren't sent to save you. The footsteps outside shifted. Ready to move. We were sent to retrieve the Omega you lost. The door to Bay 4 swung open. The bay door hit the wall hard. 2 men in tactical black filled the frame. Not hospital security, not police. No badges. No identifiers. Just dark gear and the kind of stillness that meant they had done this before and weren't nervous about doing it again. Zenari didn't move back. Neither did Selim. That surprised him, the not moving. Every logical part of his brain was telling him to step away, get behind something, let the men with obvious authority handle whatever this was. His feet didn't cooperate. The lead enforcer, the speaking one, stepped between the doorway and the 2 new arrivals with his shoulders squared. This bay is under medical restriction. The man in front didn't acknowledge that. His eyes went past the enforcer, past Zenari, straight to Selim, held there for 2 full seconds. Then he spoke into the comm at his collar. One word. Confirmed. And they left, just like that, turned around and walked back into the corridor, footsteps receding fast, the sound of them moving toward the stairwell, not the elevator, and then nothing. Selim realized he had stopped breathing. He started again. What was that? He said. No one answered him. The speaking enforcer pulled the bay door shut and engaged the manual lock. A function Selim hadn't even known that door had. He turned back to Zenari with his jaw tight. They confirmed presence. They'll report back and regroup. How long? 15 minutes. Maybe less. Zenari looked at Selim. Selim looked back. You need to tell me what is happening right now. You need to trust that leaving this room tonight without me is the wrong move. I don't know you. Something crossed Zenari's face. Not frustration. Not dismissal. Closer to grief. The kind that arrived without warning and was gone before you could name it. I know, he said. That's the problem. Selim turned away from him. He needed his hands to do something useful, so he crossed to the storage cabinet and pulled out a portable tablet. Offline capable, not connected to the hospital network. He used it for patient notes during system outages. He opened the archive function. The hospital system had its own internal backup, separate from the networked cloud. Older. Slower. The kind of archive that predated the current digital infrastructure and hadn't been fully migrated because nobody had gotten around to it yet. He searched by date range, 6 years back, and the word medical, and one more term, experimental. The archive returned 11 files. 10 of them opened normally. The 11th, he clicked it and the screen filled with text before he could register what he was reading. Medical experiment logs. Dense. Technical. Patient identifiers coded. Not named. But the project heading was clear. Neural suppression trials. Bond stability division. Below that, a list of trial participants. All coded. All anonymous. Except two. 2 entries at the bottom of the list where the coding had been partially corrupted. Not deliberately wiped, just damaged by time and a system migration that hadn't gone cleanly. 2 partial names. The first 4 letters of a first name. DNA. And below that, AL. Selim's hand tightened on the tablet. His own name. Partial. Damaged. But his. In a neural suppression trial file. From 6 years ago. When he had no memory of anything. The file opened a second page on its own. He hadn't touched it. It just turned. And on that page was a photograph. Black and white. Low resolution. Time-stamped 6 years and 3 months ago. 2 men standing in what looked like a research corridor. Fluorescent lighting. Medical equipment visible in the background. One of them was Zenari. Younger. Less guarded in the face. But Zenari. The other one was standing with his back slightly angled to the camera. But the jawline was visible. The build. The way the left shoulder sat slightly lower than the right. A thing Selim had always blamed on years of carrying a bag on one side. He was looking at himself. Smiling. Next to Zenari. In a facility he had never been to. In a year he claimed not to remember. The file name at the top of page 2 loaded fully for the first time. Bond subjects. Match confirmed. Selim set the tablet down on the counter very carefully so he didn't drop it. He turned around. Zenari was watching him. He had been watching him the entire time. How long have you known? Selim said. Zenari's answer was quiet. Since the moment you put on your gloves. He was fully standing now. Suture line intact. Shirt still torn at the side. Feet planted on cold tile like the blood loss from an hour ago had been a minor inconvenience and not a medical event that should have had him horizontal for the next 12 hours. Selim was done pretending that was normal. Sit down, he said. I'm fine. You have 17 stitches in your ribcage. I've had worse. He believed that. That was the part that bothered him. Zenari crossed the bay slowly. Not toward the door. Not toward the tablet. Toward Selim. And stopped 2 feet away. Close enough that Selim could see the tension still sitting in his jaw. The thing he was holding back from saying. The 2 enforcers had positioned themselves at opposite ends of the room. Alert. Quiet. Not watching Zenari. Watching the door. And the walls. Like the threat wasn't necessarily going to come through the obvious entry point. The photo in that file, Selim started. was taken during the third phase of the trial. What trial? The bond stabilization program. Zenari said it plainly, like he'd rehearsed this, or like he'd been holding it ready for a long time and had given up trying to find a gentle way in. It was a government-backed research program, medical and behavioral. The objective was identifying and testing alpha-omega bond pairs under controlled neural suppression, studying how the bond survived when memory access was chemically restricted. Selim stared at him. You're telling me someone suppressed our memories on purpose? I'm telling you they tried to measure what was left when they did. That's not a theory. It's documented. You just read the file. He had read the file. Bond subjects. Match confirmed. His partial name next to Zenari's. A photograph of two people who were supposed to be strangers. I remember pieces, Zenari said. Not everything. The suppression wasn't clean on my end. It degraded over time. Images, sounds, the feeling of a specific room. He paused. Your hands. Selim said nothing. I remembered your hands before I remembered your face. When you started stitching, I knew. Not consciously. Deeper than that. That pull. From the first moment. From the first snap of a glove. Selim had been writing it off as stress and a long shift and a strange night. He was done writing it off. What happened to us? He said. After the trial. Zenari's expression changed. Not grief this time. Controlled anger. The kind that had been managed for years and was still just barely managed. The program was shut down. Officially, budget cuts and inconclusive results. Unofficially, he stopped. Unofficially what? The bond pairs who showed the strongest results were flagged for separation. The research team determined that a stable, functioning alpha-omega bond created a closed system, too resistant to external influence. To control. They didn't want stable bonds. They wanted data. So the pairs that worked. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Selim heard the ending anyway. The pairs that worked were the ones they took apart. They separated us, Selim said, and erased the separation itself. Silence. The enforcer near the east wall shifted his weight, checked his watch, said quietly, 11 minutes. 11 minutes until whoever had confirmed Selim's presence in this bay came back with more people. Zenari reached out. Slow. Deliberate. Giving Selim the full second to move away if he wanted to. He didn't move. Zenari's hand closed around his wrist. The same grip from before, but different now. Not desperate. Certain. And the moment contact landed, something happened. Not a vision. Not a film reel of lost years playing back in order. Flash. One image. That same research corridor from the photograph, but from inside it. From the perspective of standing in it. Zenari beside him. A sound. Someone speaking a name, not their own, a third person in the room, a voice giving an instruction. Then nothing. Gone. Selim pulled his wrist back slowly. His chest was doing something complicated. That was a memory, he said. The first one that comes back is always fast, Zenari said. Like a door opening just wide enough to show you the light before it closes again. There are more. Yes. How many? Zenari looked at him for a long moment. Enough that when you have all of them, you won't be asking me who I am. The speaking enforcer moved from the door. Touched Zenari's arm once. A signal, not a grab. We have to move. Zenari held Selim's eyes. Come with us. I have a shift. Selim. The way he said it, like the name belonged to him. Like he'd said it 10,000 times in a room Selim couldn't access yet. They didn't erase you, Zenari said. They separated us. And everything you think you forgot, it isn't gone. He took one step toward the door. Turned back. They separated us. The stairwell was cold. Service access, concrete walls, bare bulbs, the kind of passage that existed for maintenance staff in emergencies and no one else at 3 a.m. Their footsteps were the only sound. For people moving fast but controlled, Zenari ahead, both enforcers bracketing Selim in the middle without making it look like that's what they were doing. He noticed. He let it go. Because the alternative was stopping in a stairwell to argue about whether he was being guided or guarded, and the 11-minute countdown had expired 4 minutes ago. They came out on sublevel 2. Storage. Records. The old wing of the hospital that had been mostly decommissioned when the new East Tower opened. Equipment draped in plastic. Filing cabinets that still held paper, actual paper, from before the system migration. The speaking enforcer. Selim had started thinking of him as Voss because he needed something to call him, and that was the energy he gave off. Moved to a corner terminal that had no business having power. It had power. Pull the surgical record archive, Zenari said. Voss typed. Fast. Selim stood at the edge of the light from the monitor and tried to put together what he knew in order. The trial. The bond pair file. The photograph. The flash of memory that had landed when Zenari's hand touched his wrist. That corridor, that third voice, that instruction being given. He had been in that program willingly. That was the part that had been sitting sideways in his chest since he'd seen the photo. Not trapped. Not dragged in. Standing next to Zenari and smiling in a research corridor, like he had agreed to be there. Which meant the question wasn't just who erased him. It was what had he known before the erasure that made him a candidate for it. The wound, he said. Zenari turned. The wound wasn't just an entry point for the tracker. Selim was working it through out loud now, because the pieces were moving and he needed them to stay visible. The laceration angle. The depth. The placement. Just below the ribcage on the left side. He paused. That's a bonding marker location. Zenari was very still. Whoever cut you knew what they were doing. They weren't just placing a tracker. They were opening the bond site. Deliberately. Selim felt his voice steady out. The stitching activated something. That's why you reacted when I touched you. That's why the system flagged me as an unauthorized memory link. The suture thread. My hands, the pressure, the proximity. It acted like a key. Voss looked up from the terminal. The silent enforcer, Rail. Selim had named him too, shorter, less patient. Turned from the door. Zenari said, "How do you know where the bonding marker location is?" Selim stopped. Because he did know. He hadn't learned that in nursing school. It wasn't in any medical text he had studied. He had pulled that fact out of himself the way you pulled a word out that you knew without being able to say where you learned it. Because I knew it before, he said. Quiet. Yes. Voss's fingers stopped on the keys. Got it, he said. Selim and Zenari crossed to the monitor. Surgical record. Old format. Logged under a patient identifier that meant nothing. A number, not a name, but the date. 6 years and 2 months ago. And the procedure type. Bonding marker assessment, Omega classification. And the attending practitioner field. Where a name should be. Where a doctor's credentials should appear. Logged as required by medical standards. It was blank. No, not blank. Redacted. The specific gray bar redaction of a document that had been legally altered after the fact. But below the practitioner field, the witness log. The secondary signature required for any classified medical procedure. That field had only been partially redacted. For letters visible through the gray bar where the ink had bled through on the original scan. OKAF. Selim's breath left him in a single, slow exhale. He had witnessed his own bond assessment. He had been in that room not as the patient, as the practitioner's witness. He had known what was being done. He had signed off on it. He had stood in that room 6 years ago with full knowledge of the program, full knowledge of what the trial meant, and he had put his name on the paper. And then they had taken that knowledge away. Not from Zenari alone. From both of them. He turned away from the monitor. Pressed the back of his hand to his mouth for a moment. Rail was watching him from the door. no expression. But something in his posture had changed, a fraction of deference that hadn't been there before, like he had just recalibrated what Selim was. Selim lowered his hand. He turned back to Zenari. I signed the witness form. I was there. I knew the procedure. I knew the bond markers. He held Zenari's gaze and didn't let it go. Why would I agree to be erased if I already knew everything? Zenari's jaw moved. Once. Because you chose it, he said. That doesn't. You chose it. Selim. The first time he had said his name directly to his face, and it landed differently than it had as a half-conscious whisper from a hospital bed. You requested the suppression. For yourself. And the file that would tell you why. He stopped. What file? The file they couldn't fully delete. Voss said it from the terminal, still looking at the screen. The one with the original request form. Selim walked back to the monitor. He looked at the screen. A new document had loaded. Partially corrupted. Text broken in several places. But the header was intact. Voluntary suppression request. Omega subject. And below it, in a field labeled reason for request, 3 lines of text. The first 2 were corrupted. Unreadable. The third line was intact. He read it once, then read it again, because it didn't make sense. It made complete sense. And it changed everything. The reason he had chosen to forget was to protect someone. The document didn't say who, but his hands. His hands that had been steady through blood and sutures and a night that made no structural sense, started to shake. The remote recall alert came with no warning. No alarm. No countdown. No message on a screen. Just a sound, low, precise, the kind of frequency that sat below normal hearing, and Selim's vision went white at the edges. He grabbed the edge of the terminal. Zenari was there before he could fall. Both hands on Selim's shoulders, turning him, holding him steady with a firmness that had nothing clinical about it and everything protective. What's happening to him? Voss said, already moving. They activated the recall protocol, Zenari said. Tight, controlled. But something was breaking through the control. Something raw and urgent that turned the words into something between a statement and a curse. Someone triggered remote memory suppression. They're trying to wipe him again. Rail was at the door in one move. We need to leave. Now. He can't move yet. He has to. Selim's vision cleared. Mostly. The edges were still wrong. Flickering, gray, like a monitor cycling between signals. He could see the room. He could see Zenari's face 2 feet from his. He could feel the concrete floor under his feet. What he couldn't hold on to was the document. The voluntary suppression request. The third line. The reason. He had read it. 30 seconds ago he had read it and understood it. Now it was gone. Not the words, he could still see the shape of the words on the page. But the meaning had slid out, like trying to hold water in an open palm. Like the understanding had been there and was now being actively pulled back. They're pulling it, he said. His voice came out wrong, too slow. I know. Zenari's grip on his shoulders tightened. Stay with me. Eyes on me. The document, the reason I requested the suppression. I read it. I know what it said. Then tell me. Zenari looked at him. The urgency was still there. And under it something heavier. The thing a person carried when they had been holding a secret long enough that it had started to feel like part of the body. You can't receive it from me right now. If the recall protocol is active and your memory is in a suppression cycle, any information input during the window could be overwritten. He paused. You have to hold what you already know until the cycle completes. How long? Minutes. Maybe more. Selim forced his breathing to slow. What did he know? His name. His shift. His 6 years as a nurse at Hargrove Medical. Zenari. The trial. The bond pair file. The photograph. The witness signature. His initials on a procedure he had apparently stood in the room for with full knowledge. The reason. The third line, gone. But the shape of it, the emotion it had left when it landed, that was still there. A specific kind of ache. The kind that came from sacrifice. From deciding that something else mattered more than yourself. He had erased himself. For someone. The person I was protecting, Selim said. His voice was getting steadier. The reason I requested the suppression, it was to protect someone. Zenari was quiet for 1 second too long. Yes. Who? Another second. Zenari. Selim. Who was I protecting? The sublevel around them had gone very still. Voss and Rail were stationed at each end of the corridor, watching both directions, but in the quiet between footsteps and distant building hum, even they were listening. Zenari released one of Selim's shoulders. He reached into his jacket. A drive. Small. Physical storage, the kind that held data offline, outside any network that could be wiped. He placed it in Selim's hand. Everything is on there, he said. The trial records. The separation order. The names of everyone who authorized the wipe. And the full text of your request form, including the third line. Selim closed his fingers around it. Why didn't you show me this at the start? Because you needed to find the edges of it yourself first. If I handed you the complete picture before your own memory started moving, you would have had information without recognition. Data without feeling. He held Selim's eyes. The bond doesn't restore through information. It restores through contact. Through your own mind arriving at the truth on its own. That's why the stitching. Yes. And why they designed the wound to bring you here. Someone knew the stitching would start the process. Someone knew that if I ended up in your hands, in this specific hospital on this specific shift, the recall would begin. His jaw tightened. The same person who arranged the cut arranged for you to be the one who found it. Selim stared at him. Someone set this up. Someone who knew both of us. Knew the trial. Knew the bond marker location and knew your schedule and knew that the one nurse in this building who could reverse 6 years of suppression with a suture kit was you. Rail's voice came from the east end of the corridor. Movement on sublevel 1. Multiple contacts. How many? Voss said. 6. Moving to the stairwell. Zenari straightened. Decision mode, the shift was immediate. We move through the service tunnel. West exit. Now. He reached back for Selim without looking. Selim took the hand. They moved. The corridor was long and badly lit, and the sound of boots above them was getting louder with each second. 6 people on the stairwell, descending, and whoever had triggered the recall protocol was either already here or directing from somewhere close enough to monitor in real time. Halfway down the corridor, Selim's feet stopped. Not from the protocol. Not from memory loss. From a thought that arrived without invitation and refused to move. The person who arranged this, he said. Zenari stopped. Turned. The one who set up the wound and the schedule and the bond marker activation. You're saying they knew all of it, trial protocols, bond pair records, my exact work schedule 6 years after a memory wipe. Yes. That's not someone working from old files. No. That's someone who has been tracking both of us. Actively. The whole time. Zenari said nothing. Don't, Selim said. Don't stay quiet on this one. The doctor, Zenari said. Lo. The one who ran the original trial. The one who signed the separation order. He disappeared when the program was shut down. Officially deceased. Unofficially. He's alive. He has been moving, watching, and 6 months ago, Zenari stopped, then finished it. He contacted me, said he had found a way to reverse the suppression without triggering the government recall system. But you ended up in this hospital bleeding, because someone found out he had made contact, and they got to him before the reversal could be completed, and sent a message through me. Rail's voice again, closer now. Urgent. They're on sublevel 2. We have 90 seconds. Zenari pulled Selim forward. They were moving again. Fast, the tunnel entrance ahead. The darkness past it promising either escape or a dead end. And Selim's mind was running one thought on a loop. The doctor who ran the trial, who had been watching them for 6 years, who had contacted Zenari and been silenced before the plan could complete, who was officially dead, but alive, and being hunted. And also, Zenari had just said it, hunting them. Don't let them take you again. The tunnel ended in a loading bay. Concrete. Cold air coming through a rolling door that was cracked open exactly 8 inches. Enough for a person to get through if they moved sideways. Outside was a service road, no lights, the kind of exit that appeared on no hospital map that was publicly accessible. Someone had left that door cracked. On purpose. Zenari went first. Then Selim. Then Voss and Rail last, pulling the door shut behind them with both hands until the latch caught. Outside, the night was still dark, that specific 4 a.m. dark that was different from midnight dark. Thinner, less certain of itself. The sky at the far east edge was not yet light but had stopped being fully black. A vehicle was waiting. No headlights. Engine running low. Voss went to the driver's side. Rail took the passenger front. Zenari opened the rear door and waited. Selim stood on the service road with cold concrete under his shoes and a physical data drive in his fist and 6 years of his own life that he couldn't fully reach, and looked at the vehicle. Then at Zenari. The recall protocol, he said. Is it still running? It stopped when we moved below the sublevel. The signal has a building-based range. Will it activate again if I leave the building's perimeter? Not the same one. But yes, if they reacquire your location and have a mobile emitter, yes. Selim turned the drive over in his hand. What's on this, all of it? The separation order. The names. Everything documented. Including who gave the order to suppress us in the first place. Yes. And the third line. He looked up. The reason I requested it. Zenari held his gaze. Yes. Selim got in the car. The door closed. The vehicle moved. No headlights until they reached the main road, and even then, just the minimum. Moving through a city that was almost asleep, in the last hour before morning made everything visible again. Zenari sat beside him. Not speaking. Not pushing. Just present in the particular way of someone who had been waiting for this specific moment for long enough that arriving in it felt almost too fragile to disturb. Selim opened the drive on the small tablet Voss passed back from the front seat. The files loaded. He went directly to the request form. Found the third line. Read it. Once. His eyes went still on the screen. Because it was 3 words. That was all. 3 words that explained everything. The choice to erase himself, the 6 missing years, the reason he had stood in that research corridor and signed his own witness form and then agreed to forget that he'd done it. 3 words. To protect him. No name. The form didn't use names, nothing in the trial did. But there was only one him in that program connected to his bond marker record. Zenari. He had erased himself to protect Zenari. From what exactly the third line didn't say. That was in the separation order 2 files further down. But the shape of it was there in the memory that had come back during the flash in the bay. The corridor, the third voice, the instruction being given, and now he had enough edges to understand the center of it. Someone had threatened Zenari using Selim as leverage. And Selim had removed the leverage. On purpose. Completely. He set the tablet down on his knee. Looked out the window. You knew, he said. Not an accusation. Just a statement arriving late. I found the request form 14 months ago, Zenari said, when my own memory suppression started degrading. And you spent 14 months trying to find me. Yes. And the doctor, the one running the reversal, he's the one who found me first. He knew where you were before I did. He's been watching you since the program ended. He arranged tonight. Yes. To get you into my hands. Yes. Selim turned to look at him. Where is he now? Zanari's expression shifted. Not grief, not anger, something more complicated than either. When the government operatives moved on his location, when they found out he had made contact with me, he ran. Before we could confirm his location. Before the meeting point he had arranged could be used. So he's gone. For now. But he's alive. As of 48 hours ago, yes. The vehicle slowed at a red light. Voss's hands steady on the wheel. Rail quiet in the passenger seat. Selim was quiet too. Running through the geometry of it. The shape of a 6-year plan built by a man who had run a suppression trial and then watched his own work from the outside for half a decade. Who had found Selim. Who had arranged a wound and a schedule and a hospital bay and trusted that the bond was strong enough to survive a 6-year chemical silence. He's not just hiding, Selim said. Zanari looked at him. He's still moving. He arranged tonight. Which means he has resources and access and he's still operating. A beat. He didn't just run. He's continuing something. Silence from the front seats. Zanari said nothing. He's going to make contact again, Selim said. When it's safe. When the operatives lose the trail. That's what I believe, yes. Then we need to find him before they do. Zanari reached out. Took the tablet from Selim's knee. Closed the drive files. Handed the tablet back to Voss. Then he looked at Selim directly. And said the words he had said to his enforcers in an emergency room. Hours ago. In a world that felt like a different century, but now directed at the one person he had been looking for since the memory started returning. Find him. Selim didn't move. He sat with those 2 words in the cold interior of a car moving through a city waking up around them. Find him. The doctor who had watched them for 6 years. Who had built tonight from the outside. Who was alive and running and still operating towards something that hadn't been completed yet. And then, quietly, the way a door opened on a hinge that had been still for years, a thought arrived. The doctor had found Selim before Zanari did. Had known his location, his schedule, his shift rotation, his specific assignment to Bay 4. That was not remote tracking. That was close knowledge. That was the kind of knowledge that came from proximity. And the only person who would have known all of those specific details from the inside was someone with access to Hargrove Medical's internal systems. Someone who worked there, or had worked there, or had built an identity there. Selim's breath stopped. He looked at Zanari and said, slowly, because the thought was still arriving, still finding its edges, "What does the doctor look like?" Zanari told him. And the last 6 years rearranged themselves in a single second. Because the description, the height, the build, the particular way the man held himself according to Zanari's fragmented memory, matched someone Selim had seen regularly for the last 3 years. In the hospital, on the same floor, using a different name. The man they had been hunting, the man who had arranged all of this, was not running from Hargrove Medical. He was still inside it. And Selim had walked past him on the way out. If you made it this far, you already know this story is unlike anything else out there. Subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss what comes next, because what gets revealed in the next chapter will change everything you thought you understood about who was really pulling the strings. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Your perspective matters here, and you might just help someone else find the story that changes their day. Share this if it moved you. See you in the next one.